He made grown men look like children. Then he just vanished, never being his former self again. Today is the tale of Alexander the Great, better known as Shaun Alexander. Shaun Edward Alexander was born on August 30th of 1977 in a small town of Florence, Kentucky. To make things a little more interesting, Alexander was actually one of 9 children. Yes, one of 9, you heard that correctly. Alexander would attend Boone County High School and would play a ton of sports. He would excel in football, basketball, baseball, and even track. While we don't really care for the other sports in this video, it's still impressive to note that he was a minimum 1-star recruit for all 4. Shaun wouldn't play football until his sophomore season, where he would put up pretty solid numbers, that being 1,100 yards and 14 touchdowns. Upcoming is where Alexander would earn the rights to being the best player in the entire country. In his junior season, he would put up a whopping 2,400 rushing yards and 42 touchdowns. He did all this as a running back. Oh, and that's not it. He would have an even more stellar senior season, rushing for 3,166 yards with a crazy 54 rushing touchdowns. He finished his 3-year career of high school with an incredible 6,662 rushing yards and 110 touchdowns. He holds the state record for most touchdowns in a season, and he's top 10 in both career yards and touchdowns, and he would be number 1 recruit in the country. Again, with him in high school before the year 2005, I can't tell you who recruited him, unfortunately. I do know this. He did go to Alabama, and it was between Alabama, Notre Dame, and Michigan. Those are the 3 colleges he wanted to pick from, and he would eventually choose Alabama. His first 2 years were completely underwhelming. In his first 2 seasons at Bama, he would combine for just over 1,000 yards and only 9 touchdowns. In his junior season, he would see significant improvements, rushing for 1,178 yards and 13 touchdowns. 1 year was better than 2 previous years combined. Alexander wouldn't stop there and have an even better season, rushing for nearly 1,400 yards and having 19 touchdowns. He also holds 2 Alabama records, that being the most rushing total yards in a game, 291, and most rushing touchdowns in 1 game with 5. He held 7 other records which have been broken since then. These are true Shaun Alexander stats. Oh yeah, and he's 2nd all-time in rushing yards and 3rd all-time in rushing touchdowns in Alabama's history. Not only that, he would sneakily become an okay pass catcher out of the backfield, having 62 catches for 798 yards and 8 touchdowns over his collegiate career. In 1999, he would earn the SEC Player of the Year award, and he would also finish 7th in Heisman voting as well. Based on his last 2 years of college and just how dominating he was in high school, he would be a day 1 draft pick, being selected 19th overall by the Seattle Seahawks. His pre-draft measurables were essentially 6 feet even, 218 pounds, and a 4.58 second 40-yard dash time. Seattle drafted Alexander essentially as the plan for when Ricky Watters would retire. Shaun would barely see any playing time in his rookie season, only accumulating 313 yards and 2 touchdowns. Shaun would play in all 16 games, but he would only start in 1. Okay, so now Ricky Watters has retired, and the Seahawks are going to get their money's worth out of their 19th overall pick the previous year. This is where we find and enter Shaun Alexander into the picture. In just his first full season of actually starting, Alexander would already look like one of the best running backs in the league. While he would only start 11 games this season, he would play all 16 yet again. This is when Alexander would start to get comfortable at making other grown men cry. He was the 2000s version of Marshawn Lynch. In just his first season, he would record 309 carries for 1,318 yards and 14 touchdowns as well. He would also record 44 catches for another 343 yards and another 2 touchdowns. At this point now, Alexander has established himself as the starter for Seattle. This would be his first year of his 5-year reign of terror on the NFL. During this time, Alexander would earn the nicknames such as Alexander the Great and Mr. Touchdown. In the year 2002, Alexander would have pretty much and essentially the same exact statistical year as the one before, but this season's a little different because for the first time in his career, he actually started all 16 games and played in all 16 games. He would have a total of 1,635 scrimmage yards and 18 total touchdowns. Not only that, but he was also set a record for most touchdowns in 1 half with 5. And in 2003, he would have his best season yet, rushing for 1,435 yards and 14 touchdowns, while also being a receiving threat, having 42 catches for 300 yards and another 2 touchdowns, which is more than Kenny Golladay had in his entire stint with the New York Giants. This is when Shaun would earn nods to his first career Pro Bowl. He would be bottled up in the playoffs, having only 45 yards on 20 carries. Up until this point, every season Alexander has been getting progressively better and having even better stats. In 2004, Alexander would earn nods to his second Pro Bowl and his only All-Pro second-team appearance in his career. On his way to earning those nods, he would have a staggering 1,866 yards from scrimmage, along with 20 total touchdowns. Again, he would be completely bottled in the playoffs, having 40 rushing yards on 15 carries this time around. It's a warm September day, 60 degrees to be exact. In Seattle, no wind, but lots of overcast in the skies above. Sold out crowd of over 60,000 people, cheering, standing on their feet, screaming, doing whatever they can to make noise. This is where Shaun Alexander's best performance of his career would take place. And to make things even better, it's against their rival Arizona Cardinals. In week 3 of the 2005 NFL season, Alexander would run all over Arizona and make them regret showing up to this football game, having 22 rushes for 140 yards and 4 touchdowns, powering his way through whoever got in his path. Alexander would start his last great year with a bang. In 2005, Shaun would go absolutely nuclear. He was diabolical towards other teams. In no way, shape, or form would you want to face this guy on any given week. Alexander would have one of the best seasons we've ever seen by a running back, having almost 1,900 rushing yards this season himself. He averaged 117.5 rush yards per game, and he had 27 rushing touchdowns. His season total would come out to nearly 2,000 total yards and 28 total touchdowns. Alexander would catapult Seattle to a 13-3 record this season, helping them reach a Super Bowl. Speaking of which, Alexander would have a pretty good playoff run, rushing 60 times for 236 yards and 2 touchdowns. There is a quick side note, he did get hurt in the first game of the playoffs. He got a concussion, and when he came back, he had an absolutely incredible second game. The Seahawks would lose to the Pittsburgh Steelers in the Super Bowl. Fun fact, the Seahawks didn't line up in shotgun once in the 2005 NFL season. All the weight was on Shaun to perform, and perform he did. He would win MVP, Offensive Player of the Year, and be elected to a Pro Bowl and First Team All-Pro. He would also be the cover athlete of Madden 2007. This would unfortunately be the end and demise of Shaun Alexander's career. Just the year removed from winning an MVP, in the first week of the following season, he would break his foot, and he would continue to try to play through the broken foot all season, but he never looked like himself. In week 1 of the next season, Alexander would fracture his wrist, and this would be the start of injuries to end his career. Later on in the season, he would also lose his lead blocker to a career-ending injury, and this would result in Shaun spraining his leg muscles. Multiple. I don't know which ones, but multiple of them. Playing only 10 games, he would finish this year with less than 900 yards and only 7 touchdowns in the year 2006. In the 2007 season, he would have a total of 700 yards and 4 touchdowns. He would attempt to play in 2008 as well, but this really wouldn't go according to plan, playing in only 4 games and having 11 touches. This would be the true end of his career. It's truly sad to see how someone could have so much potential and how good they truly were to just dissipate in what feels like no time at all. Alexander would have a successful career nonetheless. He had arguably the best 5-year stretch of anyone in history, at least at the running back position. Through it all, Alexander would still break and hold many records. During his 5-year stretch of greatness, he would become the first running back to record 15 or more touchdowns in 5 consecutive seasons. He scored 98 touchdowns in that 5-year span, which is an NFL record. He earned honors to the All-Decade team for the 2000s, and he finished as Seattle's all-time leading rusher in every category. He ranks 36th all-time in rushing yards and 8th all-time in rushing touchdowns. Us fans have to do everything in our power to never forget players like Alexander, as they were a huge staple of the NFL. Alexander had a fantastic career, and he deserves all the love we can give him. He remains one of the most underappreciated players in NFL history.